Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today I'm speaking with ex-high performance manager at Red Bull and current high performance manager at Harris & Ross, Darren Roberts. Hi guys, thanks for tuning into the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today I've got another great guest coming up for you in Darren Roberts. Darren was the high performance manager at Red Bull for a number of years before moving over to be high performance manager at one of the UK's biggest physiotherapy clinics, Harris & Ross. It's a great interview with Darren. He speaks about a lot of issues in working with extreme sport athletes and creating the performance playground and how that can be applied to traditional sports. He also goes into a lot of detail about the state of S&C in the UK, as long as a little bit at the end about how you can make a successful career, working with general population in specific S&C gyms that are popping up everywhere. But just before we get on to the interview with Darren, just like to say, if you are liking all the episodes that I'm putting out on the Pacey Performance Podcast, please give me a follow on Twitter and you'll keep up to date with everything that's going on with the podcast. You can also give us a rating on iTunes and a review, which would massively appreciated. And if you do click subscribe on iTunes, you'll obviously get the episode straight to your phone or your tablet as soon as they come out. So give us a follow at Pacey Perform on Twitter, and without further ado, this is the interview with Darren Roberts. Hi guys, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today I've got Darren Roberts on the line, and without me chatting anymore, hi Darren, do you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself and where you're currently working at the moment?
Thanks for asking me to do this. I'm happy to. It's great to get these sort of things out there. That really good educational tools. For up-and-coming S&C coaches and current S&C coaches or anyone that works in performance. So thanks for asking me on. I'm currently the high performance manager at a company called Harris & Ross, which few people have probably heard of outside the physiotherapy world. It's primarily a physiotherapy company. And I think it's the largest physiotherapy company in the UK. Now, I've only been with these guys a short time, just this year, but prior to that, I was the head of performance at Red Bull for a very long time. In fact, I worked with Red Bull for almost 12 years, and I established and delivered the high performance program for Red Bull UK and all its athletes. And now at Harris & Ross, I've carried that on there. I've moved sideways from Red Bull and essentially doing the same job with Harris & Ross. All the action sport athletes still come to me and still come to us, and we still maintain a fantastic relationship with Red Bull, and they still send all of their athletes to us as well. So that's the last 12 years in a nutshell.
So how did I know I spoke to you about this before, but how did the Red Bull thing come about?
It's one of those things that for anybody that works in performance and works in sport, it's always about it was just about opportunity, just being in the right place at the right time, and then maximizing that opportunity. And I was doing a load of nutrition stuff with Warrington Wolves. This is going back 14 years ago now, and we were using Red Bull, and Red Bull the company found out, and they wanted to know how we were using it and why we were using it in sport. And that just led to a conversation with the company, which led to a few projects with them. And then, it was just very, very small to start with, but one project led to another. And then I found myself, doing more and more with Red Bull, and then more and more with the athletes, than anything else. And then over 2 or 3 years, it went from just doing a couple of things for them to that's all I was doing was working with Red Bull. So just being in the right place at the right time, seeing the opportunity and then maximizing that opportunity. And I'm sure that's the same for everybody that's working in sport currently. It's just putting yourself in that position, and then, when something turns up, pouncing on it.
Yeah, it seems a common theme with guys that I speak to. Kind of right place, right time, building relationships with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one thing you mentioned, high performance manager. I spoke a little bit with Dean Riddle about this, and he was doing it at Sheffield United 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about what a high performance manager is.
I think, and I know Dean very well, as a lot of us do, and my role is about facilitation. With a little bit of delivery, but it is what it says it is. It's a management role, and it's my job to put all the pieces of the jigsaw together, all the pieces of the performance jigsaw together for the athlete, and see where the gaps are and try and fill those gaps. And it's building your team, which I know again is a common thread through a lot of high performance organisations. You've probably heard before, but it's about building that team around me and building that network and having all the resources to hand. Not so we tell the athlete what to do. It's the athlete arrives in the middle of this and they tell us what they need, and we fill those gaps. So building the team, building the picture, putting all the pieces in place, and pulling it all together for the athlete's benefit. That's what a high performance manager is. Certainly in sport, is that key facilitator to make sure that the athlete is served and that the athlete is at the center of the process, not the process at the center of the process. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I came across to Manchester to see what you guys were doing a couple of months ago, and we spoke about, because I'd been to the UKSCA conference not too long before, and we had a little chat about that. But how do you see S&C, the state of the industry in the UK?
Well, the good thing about you coming across and seeing what we were doing was I completely dropped you in it with one of our athletes.
I was going to come on that, but you go.
No. I'll let you tell that story. But you tell that story. But that's a perfect example of the world that I operate in. But I think in terms of the state of strength and conditioning in the UK, for me, my view, and it's an industry and a job that is constantly struggling with its identity and constantly struggling with what it's doing and why. And I don't mean from a application or research point of view. I'm talking about as a job. The role of a strength and conditioning coach, the role of the strength coach, at the end of the day, is an American job for an American system. That's been adopted of a sort in the Southern Hemisphere, and that's leaked through into Europe over time. So you find that in the last 10 years, people have gone from being, in a Premiership football team, you were the fitness trainer. Well, you've gone from being the fitness trainer to the strength and conditioning coach, and then in a few short years, it's gone to, performance enhancement specialist, performance director of performance. I don't know that there's this constant evolution of job titles for the same thing, and that's, for me, is driven by a lack of identity, which is driven by a lack of security, because the lack of security that exists in sport as for jobs is absolutely ridiculous, and the demands that are placed on practitioners and what they need to be able to do versus what they get paid for versus whether they're even going to get the job is outrageous. And you see, for me, I see more and more highly paid, highly skilled, and more importantly, extremely highly experienced S&C coaches being gotten rid of for financial reasons, which is a commercial decision taken at executive level, and replaced with 3 kids straight out of university. And I also see strength and conditioning departing from strength and conditioning. Strength and conditioning coach, strength and conditioning coach. The coach is the important part of that description. And I see less strength and conditioning coaches and see huge amounts of sports scientists with an inability to deliver to athletes. And again, this just all comes down to this searching for this identity that maybe it's not got. And I know that seems like a really hypercritical view negative view of strength and conditioning in the UK right now. And let me qualify that by saying there's some absolutely amazing practitioners in the UK and some absolutely stunning work being done, which is why there's a brain drain to the US, to the NFL and other sports and elsewhere in the Southern Hemisphere, because from a sports science and from an S&C point of view, we're actually very, very good at what we do. But I think there's this undermining that happens in a commercial sense, in that it's cheaper to have 3 kids straight out of university than it is to have a very, very experienced S&C coach who costs the same.
Mm. So why do you think people are kind of gravitating towards the sports science rather than the S&C coach? Do you think it's because the experience you need to become an S&C coach, actually coaching, getting out there, doing things for nothing with an under 11 side, down wherever. Whereas kind of sports science, you kind of get the feel that it's a lot of it seems to be sat in front of a computer. So, you can get on the internet and you can learn how to operate stat sports or something, or, a GPS unit or something like that. Do you think that's true, or, where do you think they're going with it?
I don't know why, other people have a much better idea than me as to why there's just been this steady creep towards sports science dominance rather than people that can actually apply that knowledge and coach athletes. I actually don't know why. And, for me, maybe it's something to do with, you want to work in sport. You would like to be an S&C coach. You have an interest in it. You go and do a sports science degree. You then realise it's next to impossible to get a job in sport, and perhaps part of it's driven by the fact that you feel that you need to do an MSc, that you need to do a PhD, that you need to come in with this huge amount of academic horsepower to set yourself apart from someone else to at least try and get the job. I don't know. I mean, I could be completely wrong. Maybe it's the lack of security which drives this, drives the academic side of it for people to try and make sure that they're as academically qualified for the job as possible, to at least get their foot in the door. And then that, I don't know, mate. There's people probably got a much better idea than me, because I don't exist in the traditional S&C world. I feel like I'm on the outside looking in, but all I know is that I just see it marching towards this sports science dominant, scientific dominant, scientist dominant, and not so much applied and not so much about being able to coach athletes. And also as well, to be able to coach athletes, like you say, you need experience. And there's no university course can give you experience in coaching athletes and trying to get the best out of someone, or trying to have empathy with someone and actually coach them. So I don't know, mate. I'm sure people have got a lot better idea to me as to why that is. And that's just my view. It's my view that that's the way that S&C is going, that it's going towards this too sports science dominant and not being able to coach and apply that. That's just my view. I could be completely wrong.
I mean, I just want to get on to kind of what you do, programming for the extreme sports athletes, but we've left people on the edge of the seats with the little story about me coming across. So I'll go through that. So I popped across to the CrossFit gym in Trafford Park, where obviously Darren was working with two guys. One was Chris Holder, and the other was James. Who's
Dunn?
James Dunn. Yeah. Both on the watt bike, ticking over. You showed me a few videos of different bits and bobs, showed me around. And then I said, "Oh, are we going to do a session?" "Oh, yeah. Chris is going to do a session." So I obviously answered, "What are you going to do?" With your reply was, "I don't know. What are you going to do?" So I was with probably 2 minutes notice doing a session with, correct me if I'm wrong, the 2013 World Speedway champion.
Yeah.
Who had a fractured broken neck, a plate in his heel.
Multiple screws in his heel.
Okay.
He was 3 weeks post neck fracture.
Yeah.
In his I think it was his C2 maybe, and then he had a very, very serious fracture to his wrist.
Yeah.
3 weeks before that as well, which was plated and screwed.
So the thing I started with was having a little think, obviously, and then telling Chris what we were going to do. And you walked away and then came back and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" So I was like, "Well, I'm just telling you what we're going to do." And he said, "Why the fuck does he want to know that? He just wants to get on a bike. The last thing he wants to do is do what you're going to do with him. So just get it done." So that was my first introduction to working with extreme sport, which was nice. Thanks very much for that. But that was perfect. So just talk to us a little bit about kind of not being chucked under the bus.
Not being thrown under the bus, which
Exactly.
I did completely throw you under the bus.
No, it's a good story.
But ultimately, the athletes that I deal with very rarely pitch up with, mild hamstring strains. They've always had some pretty serious injury. I'm very, very fortunate that I get to work with world class action sport athletes. And I'm very, very lucky, and great athletes make coaches look good at the end of the day. So I'm extraordinarily lucky. And, James Dunn is a motocross rider. He had a catastrophic injury to his leg. He had a fracture dislocation, a full fracture dislocation of his knee, not just the patella, but the actual whole knee. He had arterial damage. He nearly lost his leg. He had to have a 6-hour operation to repair the artery and all sorts of other stuff. So he was in. Chris Holder, who you saw, who's was the world speedway champion last year. And that was at a CrossFit gym. And I don't want to get wrapped up into a CrossFit discussion, but one of the places that I use with some of the athletes, some of the times, is a CrossFit gym, because it's a decent facility. It's got plenty of space to move around in, decent equipment, decent weights, and we can get a lot done with them in there. But primarily, everything's done up at the rehab centre in Wilmslow. And how do you program for action sport athletes? What do you do with them, and how do you do it? I think, the how do you program and plan for someone to be part of a system who's good at what they do because they don't plan and they don't program and they're not part of the system? The whole reason they're good at what they do and the whole reason they're world-class action sport athletes is because they don't do as they're told. And this all comes down to the science of the art of coaching, the empathy, how you operate, the language that you use, and knowing the athlete and knowing their sport. And how you connect with them to get them to work towards something. And, as with all action sport athletes and any athlete, it's all goal orientated. It all centers around their sport and what they want to do. But it is very much an art, more so than a science, working with these guys, because if you go in there, and like with you, with Chris, you were stood there and you were doing what an S&C coach does, to a degree. You stood there and you were like explaining what the session was, and you were telling what movements you were going to do, and and I could see Chris's eyes glazing over, which is why I came over to him and said, "What are you fucking doing? Just get on with it," because Chris wants to be engaged in what's happening, but he doesn't. They don't necessarily need these ridiculously in-depth explanations of what's going to happen and why and what muscles are using and what movements at what joints and anything like that. You need to create the performance playground for them. And that's what they want to play in, and that's why I came over and said, "Look, just get on with it. Just start throwing him around. That's what he wants to do." He's been stood still for 2 minutes, which is 2 minutes too long for him. So it's they are like children, and I mean that as a compliment, not a criticism. They are like hyperactive children. So, and that's how you work with them, and that's how you keep them engaged, by thinking along those lines, rather than this is, an Olympic athlete on a 4-year cycle that, has everything planned for them down to the minutest of detail. But then, sometimes you question the accountability of that if everything's done for the athlete. So, you throw everything back onto the athlete, and create that accountability for them, create the playground, get them to play in it, and get them to motivate themselves.
So you mentioned, you've come on to the next question, but you mentioned that creating the performance playground. What does that look like? So
that's a philosophy that I've adopted, that I've taken from someone else. At the end of the day, we're all information brokers, aren't we? And I've adopted that performance playground philosophy from elsewhere, and that's where, as it says, you create a playground for the athlete to work in, and to I think the posh description's environment for guided learning, but it's with action sport athletes. I think they're not part of a system. They've not been part of a governing body or a structured team or anything like that. And their whole, sport and the whole dynamic of everything they do is centered around this playground environment, whether it's the side of a mountain or a skate park or a BMX park or a racetrack or a motocross track. It's I won't say centered around fun to take anything away from it, but these guys live, eat, and breathe their sport, with their friends. And if you create this playground environment, they tend to be a lot more engaged, and everything is a little less planned. You can create, when you put two or three of them together into this playground, they start bouncing off each other. They start doing things that they probably weren't thinking of doing. They feed off each other. They start getting this real viral learning, and then which this sort of viral performance gains going on where each is pushing the other, and you can get a real buzz going, and things happen that, unexpected things happen, which is the best thing for it, because, the more you plan, the more detail in my experience with my lot, the more you plan and the more details involved, the more likely it's to go wrong. And ultimately, what these guys do has genuine life and death consequences. So they've got to rely on their instincts and their natural instincts. And the more sterile and planned and detailed that environment is, the less it reflects what they're going to go and do. And for me, it's about nurturing those instincts and nurturing the talent that they've got, rather than trying to, railroad it into a load of specific plans. Because as I say, there is life and death consequences to what they do, and they do have a little bit of a gladiatorial attitude towards it. So, try and foster that rather than, and encourage it rather than plan it out.
So is that kind of thing transferable to your more traditional sports?
Well, it's funny you say that. I've presented on this quite a few times at some decent, traditional mainstream sport conferences, and the performance playground philosophy is one that I think is getting more and more, widely adopted. If you speak to Tony Strudwick at Manchester United, it's one of the things that he's taken on board, is creating this playground environment, and I think it's entirely transferable. The problem with it is very hard to measure. It's very hard to, create a playground and then the effect or results that you get from it put into a nice spreadsheet with pretty colours, which is
what people want to do.
Which is maybe what you feel like you need to do to justify your job. Yeah. This is the impact I'm having, and again, it comes back to that lack of security in sport. So I think it's entirely transferable to rugby, to football, to any mainstream sport. And I think that there's lots of people out there doing it, but probably don't call it the performance playground. There's lots of people that create sessions in environments which actually are quite unstructured and reactive, and no one really knows what's going on. I'm sure there's plenty of practitioners out there that are doing it, but don't necessarily have a name for it. And, for me, those sessions and those environments are the most effective, because it more accurately reflects what the athlete's going to go and do out on the pitch, on the field of play, or on the side of a mountain. Because, it's, as I say, and I know I'm repeating myself, when they're out there, they're on their own and they're having to rely on themselves and their own instincts and their own skill and talent. And so, that has to be reflected in training. So the more programmed, planned, detailed and controlled that is in training, I don't see that, for me, I don't see the transfer to my lot, but I think it's totally applicable in mainstream sports. I think it just requires a bit of a paradigm change and an imagination on the coach's part.
I mean, if you're in a traditional gym in a rugby or a football club, and the head coach or the assistant manager or whoever walks in and something's going on that's not kind of what he sees as traditional, there's going to be some questions asked. So I suppose it's got to be a buy-in right from the top, that some things you're going to do and a squat and a deadlift and a hang clean or whatever, there's going to be some stuff in there that's like you say, a bit more unusual.
Yeah, and it's not just one way or just another. It's not all about performance playgrounds, and it's not all about just that traditional uber planned out environment. It's not one or the other. It's the combination of the two, isn't it? And that's the thing. It's a mixture of everything. And and each athlete's different. Each athlete has different needs, even if they're in the same sport, even if they're the same body type, even if they do exactly the same thing. They all have very, very different needs. And I think you're right. If something's going on which doesn't look quite what they used to, there has to be buy-in from everybody. But that's the same of any culture, performance culture or high performance culture. Everybody has to buy into it from the top down. And I hear the word compliance every now and again. Everyone has to comply. Well, no, people don't have to comply. You just have to cooperate. Cooperation is much better than compliance. And it's everyone talks the joined up coaching model and the athletes at the center of it, but is that really what happens in practice? Does that really happen with that many organizations? I'm not so sure. Everybody in the UK, we're all ingrained into working in our different little silos. And because we all meet once a day, we think we have an integrated coaching model, but then we all disappear back to our different offices in our different parts of the buildings and work in our little corners. So, I think it's hard to pull off because sport is full of tradition, and those traditions, you need to know what they are. You need to be mindful of them, and but some traditions need breaking, and no one ever became the best in the world by doing the same as everyone else, did they? Innovation is about breaking the rules, and someone has to be brave enough to say, well, hang on a minute, well, why are we doing it this way? Just because it's always been done this way,
Yeah, cool. I've got another. You've mentioned it a little bit, or quite largely. Challenges from working with extreme sports. Just maybe again repeating yourself, but just go into a little bit more detail on kind of challenges you face and maybe a few examples.
Well, the extreme sport athletes, their physical needs and demands from an athletic sense are no different to other athletes. They need to be strong. I believe fully in strength foundation, that strength is the foundation from which all the athleticism can be built upon. So I like all the athletes to be strong. But again, these athletes, they've probably never spent any time in the gym. So you need to go about it very carefully about how you're going to put forward to an extreme sport athlete about a strength training program, which doesn't revolve around them doing the sport that they do. To get them into a gym to do traditional strength work, which they do need to do, is very, very difficult. And again, it comes down to the art and the empathy and knowing the athlete and them knowing you and knowing the sport and having the right relationship with them, and always relating it back to the sport for them. So it's a challenge to get them to buy into stuff like that. But that's, as I say, that's part of the art of my job. The other challenges with working with extreme sport athletes is, as I say, they don't do as they're told. That's why they're good at what they do, because, someone says, oh, yeah, you can't jump off that cliff. So they go and jump off it. So, this is where cooperation rather than compliance comes in. And this is where the athlete at the center of the process comes in, which everyone talks about, but I'm not sure how often happens. So you sit down with the athlete and you say to them, right, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And what do you need to be the best in the world? And that's a challenging question for them. And then you sit there and you actually map out exactly what they want to do, exactly how they want to do it, what tricks they want to do, where they see themselves, who is their main rival, who's doing it the way that they think they should be, or in terms of tricks and performance, and what do they need to do to be better than that. And then pretty soon you'll have a plan in front of you. I say a plan, you'll have a picture in front of you, with the gaps there. And it's at that point you say, well, maybe you should do some strength training. And then it's come from them. It's come from their picture that they've painted. And they can see the gaps themselves. And they'll go, yeah, you're right. I should do some strength training, shouldn't I? I was like, yeah, you should. So, it sounds like a little bit of kidology, but it's not. It's just, it all comes from them. Now, I have the luxury of doing that because I work with individual athletes, and I appreciate that if you're in a Premiership rugby team with a squad of 35, the S&C coach hasn't got time to sit there all day, every day going, well, what do you want? What do you want to be best in the world? But I think with the right resources, the time and, coach buy-in, that you could do that process of a sort to make it more effective for everyone. So, that's where it comes from with athletes. That's where the challenges are, to get it to come from them. And then, the injuries in action sports are catastrophic. They either get up and walk away, or they are extremely seriously injured. There's no, as I said, there's no twisted ankles. It's they either bounce and walk away, or they've nearly snapped the leg off. So, and that's the other challenges with these guys is the injury management and the ongoing care for that, and getting them back to sport how they were before.
Yeah, just to, I know you push for time, so I'm just a bit conscious of that, but if you were to go back to traditional sport, like a rugby or a football or whatever, what would you take from your time with the Extreme Boys?
If I went back into rugby, or if I went back into Premiership rugby, or back into Premiership football, I think my key learning is athlete responsibility is a huge thing. And, everyone talks the accountability game and buy-in, and the athlete must buy in, the coach must buy in. Everyone must be accountable. But, I think a lot of the systems in place, by accident remove that, because you bring an athlete in and you weigh them, you do the body fat, you do the body composition, they'll do a hydration test, they'll do a battery of health and well-being things every morning or a few mornings a week. And then you're telling them everything that's going on with them. So an athlete may turn up and feel absolutely great, but, maybe a meager wave tells them that they're not ready to train. And they're like, yeah, but I feel really good though. And you're going, oh, no. The computer says no. So I think we spend a lot of time undermining the athlete's natural instincts, which is, and I know I'm repeating myself, which are the very instincts that we expect them to rely on out when they're doing the job. So I think for me, it's not to junk all the sports science, the testing. I think it's just to try and get that. If I went back into the traditional world, is try and get the balance right between the athlete being genuinely at the center of the process and driving their own performance forward with what they feel works with them, balanced against what the science says. And it's always going to be that balance of the science and appliance, and that is what I would take with him. That is what I would try and get round. And again, try and create the environment for guided learning. Use the players' experience and knowledge, because if you go into a rugby team as an S&C coach in your first year, and you're dealing with a senior player who's in his late 20s, early 30s, you're probably the sixth S&C coach he's ever dealt with. So what can you learn from him? What can you learn from what he's learned from all the S&C coaches before you? Because they can't have all been bad. So, I just think athletes have got a lot to offer about their own map of their performance world that we should maybe spend more time listening to. But I know that's uncomfortable because it probably feels like you're letting the lunatics take over the asylum. But, it's for me, I think getting that balance right, listening to the athletes, getting them to drive more of their own process forward, which then creates this greater cooperation, and I think leads to a greater culture of accountability.
Yeah, that's really that's brilliant. I mean, it's certainly lots of stuff I can take away from that, so I'm sure it'll be the same for the people. Just a little bit of a roundup, really. Little projects that you got coming up where people can keep in touch with what you're doing.
Well, it's go all the time. If you work in the world of performance rehabilitation with action sport athletes, and you're never short of work because they're always throwing themselves down the road or down the mountains, aren't they? But we've got a number of athletes in at the moment, and then project wise, there's there's so much on, and it's hard to say, this is how you can keep in touch. If you go to the Harrison Ross website, we try and put on there as best as possible who we're working with, what we've got going on, what events we've been to, which part of the world we're going to. I've got some pretty exciting projects coming up with weirdly out in Sri Lanka. I've got I often get, for whatever reason, invited to speak at conferences. I don't know why. They must be desperate or something, like getting to me to the bottom of the list. But things, NASA invited me out to speak to their whole astronaut training team and life sciences, which I did last year. There's things like that coming up again. I'm talking at the British Association of Sport and Exercise Medicine National Conference, which is next month, which is up in Edinburgh, about extreme sports, action sports medicine, and how it's pushing the boundaries of sports medicine and what's possible. So if you go to the Harrison Ross website, you can try and, we try and update that as much as possible with what we're doing, who we're doing it with, and where I'm going to be and everything else. But, it's really dynamic. It's really fast. And these guys push us really, really hard, obviously. Everything that I've said today as well, I hope it doesn't sound critical of anything, too critical or of anyone or anything. I'm fully aware that I have the luxury of working with individual athletes, and I'm painfully aware of that I've got the luxury of not answering to a director of rugby or a director of football or a performance director. I totally get that. I'm extremely lucky that I've got the movement that I've got, the responsibility that I've got, and the resources to just, when someone turns up, is just to get on with it, without having to go through 300 different levels of decision making and questions. So I get all of that totally. But anyway, there you go.
So you put quite a lot of stuff on Twitter as well. What's your Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm the real Coned, obviously the real Coned, because there's lots of fakes out there. It's again, social media. I tend to find out about what the athletes are doing and why via Twitter or Instagram first. So what happens is, one of them will post a picture of the leg hanging off, and then I'll go, all right, so we'll see you tomorrow.
We'll see you in a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you. And then I'll get the phone call after it's been posted to social media saying, so I've snapped my leg off. So, you can keep in touch with me and and all the athletes that we work with via social media. And obviously you can imagine all the action sport athletes that we work with, at a world level. They're very, very active on social media. And that's a good thing. But one thing I do want to say, if we've got time, is any aspiring S&C coaches that are out there, or even ones that are currently working in sport, and it's something I talked about with Brendan Chaplin, is don't get hung up on trying to get the job in sport as a full-time S&C with a professional team, whatever sport that is, at whatever level. I think the one thing that has changed over the last 10, 15 years, which I didn't mention before, is you don't have to be working with a team to be a credible S&C coach. There's nothing wrong with working with civilians in your own facility, in a decent gym, and trying to bag that one semi-professional or professional athlete, which can lead on to others. And I think there's maybe a stigma attached to being what's seen as a glorified personal trainer in a gym, and I don't think that's the case. I think there's some really decent facilities out there right now, and the 10 years ago it was either an elite gym in an elite team, or a sort of fitness chain gym, and there was nothing in between. And there's been a massive explosion of independent S&C facilities that have got good kit, good weights, plenty of space, and all right coaches in them, doing free weights. And I think chasing that dream job, or perceived to be a dream job, in a team is I just don't want people to get hung up on that, especially ones that are coming to an end of a sports science degree or MSc in strength and conditioning. There's credible options and opportunities out there with civilians in independent facilities, training your local rugby team, building your skill set as a coach to be able to, learn your art, and take your time over it. I don't know. I just think everyone seems to be tripping over themselves to do their MSc, get UKSCA accredited, and then immediately want to fire themselves into a job at a first team Premiership team. And be careful what you wish for, because, you'll get sacked at the end of the year, even though you've done nothing wrong. So, I know I'm repeating myself. There's credible facilities, opportunities out there working with civilians, and, it's just something for people to think about, I think.
No, I think that's, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's been great. But yeah, just to round up, because I know we're nearly 40 minutes and you've got things to do. So I'll just say thank you very much for your time again. And yeah, that's it. Job done.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and just to say, I am making it up as I go along. I am literally making it up as I go along, as is everyone else. They just maybe don't admit it, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I just stick my finger in the air and go, I hope this works out all right.
Well, it seems to have done so far, so you're doing something right.
Brilliant. Nice one, Rob.
Okay, thanks, mate. Cheers for that.
Cheers, mate. Take it easy. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning into the Pace Performance podcast. I thought it was a great episode with Darren. It spoke about some really interesting issues and plenty to take away from that personally, so I'm hoping you feel the same. Don't forget to keep in touch with everything that's going on the podcast. If you give me a follow on Twitter at Pacey Perform, everything we put out there that's going on with the podcast. If you do want to go on iTunes and subscribe, like I've said before, the episode will pop up straight on your laptop, phone or tablet. If you do want to also give us a rating and a review on iTunes, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will speak to you with some more great guests soon.